How does a man know when and when not to be brave?
The things that don't require a man to be brave are the things we pursue for selfish ambitions. Selfishness requires no bravery. True bravery is always required if a man is going to be selfless.
Welcome to the King Culture Podcast, where we are equipping men to become selfless leaders. I'm Yvette Broughton.
And I'm Domonic Perviance.
And we are your hosts. All right, Dominic, so we are back again to talk about bravery this podcast, which this should be interesting because it seems that men probably know something about this. You know, every man's told you need to man up. Yeah. I'm sure they're sick of that phrase. What does it mean to man up? What does it mean to be brave? But when we're talking about bravery, what are we referring to with respect to being a king and becoming a selfless leader?
Well, in its simplest form, bravery is simply being able to act in the midst of danger or uncertainty. And so, you know, when you're just living, or especially when you're leading, when you're trying to do anything outside of, just your basic survival in life, you're always going to there comes moments where you have to be able to act when you don't understand what the outcome is going to be, or when you know that there's danger and there's obstacles and there's opposition in front of you, and you still have to perform.
Yeah.
Still have to step out there.
Have to take a risk.
Yeah. And so bravery, in its very simplest form, is about taking risk. It's about being willing to step out of your comfort zone of what's familiar to you, and being willing to do what's necessary, even though you have opposition working against you.
It's interesting that last podcast we were talking about responsibility, and sort of this, we talk about like how all of these different attributes, they layer sort of on top of one another, and how part of being responsible or part of your response may involve you taking some risk and doing things where you might not look super cool on the other side of it, right? Because you're uncertain about how it may turn out.
It's in fact, anytime you take responsibility and you are attempting to fight for justice or make the world better, or leverage your influence for the benefit of other people, there's always risk, and it always requires bravery.
Yeah,
it requires some sense of I'm going to step out here, not knowing if this is going to work out for me, or I know that there's opposition. I know that people disagree with me. I know that people are going to fight against me. I know that there's some forces maybe outside of my control that I'm going to have to contend with. That's anytime you're trying to make any kind of real progress, you're going to have to
face that risk.
Yeah, and I always think about like us even doing this, even doing King Culture, stepping out. It's almost like a lot of people, if you watch sports, there's this thing called Monday morning quarterback, and it means that on Monday morning after the Sunday football game, you are critiquing what the quarterback did. And giving your own assessment. But it doesn't require any bravery to be a Monday morning quarterback.
This is facts.
It requires bravery to actually step out on the field and play the game.
That's right.
And so when we talked about in a couple podcasts ago how we live in a broken world. We live in a world full of injustice. We live in a world that's always going to be full of opposition and tension and struggle, and especially if you're trying to make the world better. And so in that world, like, if you're going to try to change anything, it's going to require you to step out on the field.
Yeah.
And not, we have in this big culture where everyone kind of sits on social media and they tweet and,
and get in the comments and say what they want to say.
Nah, man. Like, real change requires some level of risk outside of you doing something that's very comfortable and very familiar. It requires you actually putting boots to the ground, getting out in the field, getting into the arena and being willing to play the game.
Yeah, like one of our friends always talks about like in his career having to like face his ignorance and how, you know, that's a risk in and of itself. So a lot of times we might feel like, oh, well, yeah, I'm brave. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to live my dream, right? But there may be a level of confidence there, maybe that because you feel a certain sense of safety, or I know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to take a risk. And not to say that that doesn't include risk, but I think like risk is when maybe you have to ask for help. Like, are
Yeah.
you brave enough to ask for help when you don't know what you're doing? Or,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, that's a great point. Like, I was going to say that there's a difference between being brave and being foolish.
Well, then there's that.
Right? Like some people think, well, I'm being brave. No, you're just being presumptuous, right? You're stepping out there trying to, and you haven't studied, you haven't read, you don't know what the issues are. You're just making a whole bunch of
Yeah,
noise.
yeah.
And so it takes no bravery to just make a whole bunch of noise. True
Yeah.
bravery sometimes means you have to take the time to study an issue. I have to learn what I know and what I don't know. I have to get equipped to be able to handle it. And
Yeah.
so some people, you know, they're unwilling to do something that they're uncomfortable with, so they stay with what's
With what they
familiar.
know,
Like, I know
exactly.
how to do this, but if you want to really solve that problem,
That's right.
that problem over there is so big that maybe you have to go get a degree. Maybe you have
Yeah.
to go study for a few years. Maybe you need to go partner with someone and actually know what you're
Right.
doing. And so sometimes bravery isn't just you stepping out and doing the risky things. Sometimes it means you stepping back and getting equipped before you can step forward.
Yeah.
And that takes a certain, we talked a few podcasts ago about being honest with yourself. Like if you have dignity, you could be honest. Like sometimes it means, okay, I'm not equipped to do this. And I need to learn what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that level of honesty does take bravery.
It does. It does. And also, too, you think about it takes bravery in relationships, you know?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, I think sometimes we always equate or want to apply bravery when it comes to our career because that often has a lot to do with our image.
Yeah.
Right? Like, well, if I achieve this, and like, we want to be brave where we feel like we can achieve something. But sometimes bravery is having a hard conversation that you
Yeah.
don't like having. Sometimes bravery is going to therapy. Sometimes bravery is doing things that require vulnerability.
Yeah.
And vulnerability requires bravery as well. And we need to, I think, for men, sometimes men, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are so associated with their do,
Yeah.
like with what I'm doing, and sort of externalizing, right, so that you can give me credit for my bravery,
Yeah.
right? And I get that, like, you know, want to be rewarded for those types of things, but some bravery is a thankless job, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we tend to try to hide our weakness and try to overcompensate for our weakness by powering up and giving the appearance of bravery when it really isn't. Sometimes bravery just means being able to say, look, yo, I'm wrong. I made a mistake. Being able to apologize to someone,
Yeah.
be able to make amends for a relationship, being able to, sometimes it means being able to take the hit. You know, I know that me admitting that I'm wrong or maybe taking responsibility for this situation means that I'm gonna take a L here.
Right, it's going to cost me
It
something.
cost me something.
Yeah.
And you know, bravery, probably the biggest aspect of bravery is, particularly where leadership is concerned, is there's a level of bravery that can only be achieved when you're selfless. Because we all are willing to take risk, but we're not willing to put ourselves at risk, right? Like I'll take a risk, I'll go and invest money or whatever, but I'm not willing to put myself in danger for the benefit of someone else or for the benefit of this cause. That's when you step into a realm of being selfless. Like true bravery, where selfless leadership is concerned, requires you to be willing to put yourself at risk.
On the line, yeah.
Put yourself on the line. And, I think about we mentioned a couple podcasts ago about John Lewis, and we we just passed this year, and I was reminded of his story of going over the bridge in Selma, Alabama, fighting for voting rights for African Americans, and what made that action so brave is that he knew that I am putting myself at risk
My
to be
life.
beat, be thrown in jail, and he was willing to do it. He stepped out of his comfort zone and put his life on the line, and he was willing to take the hit because he knew that on the other side of it, on the other side of that selfless action, meant that he would make the world around him better.
What I would love to leave behind is a code for my family to follow, for even the future generation of people who aspire to do anything that I've done or respect anything that I've done, but a set of principles of how to do life in the world around like health, wealth, and self, and a sense of like how do I exist in the world as a black man, as a person of color in society. How do I make sense of it all? So this code, I think about it as a code, as an algorithm for my children to follow.
You mentioned John Lewis and just this, I think that's what was so great about our forefathers is that you saw this risk their physical bodies kind of like being on the line. And now, there are protests, right? We're still fighting for justice in very key ways. What do you think, how is bravery relevant today, or just the need, I think, for this generation to risk their ego, just risk their life. I mean, like, you often think of that scripture, like, what's worth dying for? But, like, there's levels to risk. There's and then does it always have to be that intense?
Yeah, that's a good point, because, people like John Lewis and Dr. King, I mean, those are heavy things. It's like, how does that play in our everyday life as men? But I will say that it was Coretta Scott King that said that every generation, justice is something that has to be won
with every generation. Yeah.
And so, like, we, at least in the very big things, we all have something that we need to be fighting for. Yeah. And like justice and making the world around us better requires some level of bravery. And so we have to, that's sort of the crown that our generation has to grow tall enough to reach, at least in the big things. But the very small things, bravery, you don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to go over this bridge and take a beating. Like, bravery starts every day with you being willing to be brave in the small things. Yeah. Like being willing to apologize when you're wrong, being willing to admit that you made a mistake, being willing to be humble.
And say, I need help.
Yeah. Like, that's where bravery starts. And you exercise the muscles of bravery in those small, everyday decisions. And when you do that, when you mature in that level of bravery, you'll be able to take on the big issues of our time. But it's not I think as men, we kind of power up, we try to overcompensate. Like, I'm brave out here fighting. There's a lot of people out there protesting, but and I think that's good. There are moments to protest, but at the same time, it's that can be easy for us to do, right? Yeah. Because we're angry, we're emotional. The moment calls for it, but the emotion is going to die. The camera's going to go away. Right. And like
the bravery is like when no one's watching.
When no one's watching, can I keep going? When I don't get any credit for this, when no one's going to be celebrating me, when it doesn't go right, and when it takes time and years. You think about those your generation before us fighting for civil rights. I mean, it took a generation.
It took time. It wasn't just a highlight reel sometimes that we remember, that it was an ongoing thing.
I think just for our generation, just to go back to your question, man, it is the bravest thing that we can do is take the focus off of us. Yeah. And, we have this celebrity culture. Everyone wants to be famous. Everyone wants to have their own podcast and be on camera. And we are, we're obviously doing this, but the reason why we're doing this is not to make ourselves great, is to invest in other people. And if we can ever get to a point where our life isn't about us, and we're willing to give it all for somebody else, we step to a higher level of bravery and selfless leadership.
Yeah, and you know what else too? I think it's interesting, right? Like we talked about the civil rights and kind of fighting for justice in a social sense, right? Like social justice.
Yeah.
But I think that there is generational justice can look different, right? It can look like justice in your family. There was a young man that we posted on our Instagram. It kind of went viral a little while ago. It's a guy named Kier and them, and he's talking about going to therapy, and he's talking about getting healthy, and I think that's brave.
Yeah.
That's brave, and that's still a cause worth fighting for. That's still a way, I think, of fighting for justice. But it's like, I want my family to look this way so that, God willing, my children's family will continue to kind of go in that vein. And so I think, it's just important for men to think about the sphere of influence, right? Like we talk about taking responsibility, like in what ways in your life right now can you be brave? Which I think kind of brings us to our next segment, of just, we always want to kind of encourage and say this is possible. Sometimes it can feel, king culture is very aspirational, right? But it's important to have a standard, because if you don't have a standard, you can't rise to the standard. And I think we just want to remember who we are and to kind of keep that image. You become what you behold. So I think what we're trying to do is sort of lift up an image and say, hey, we get to be these individuals in culture if we do the hard work, really, right, of being selfless. So what are some things that you feel like, what would you say, just as a charge that men can start to do to be brave in 2020 and beyond?
Man, it goes back to what we said earlier. Start with the little things. Don't start at the top of the mountain. Start at the bottom. Like, just the first area of bravery is, being honest with yourself about your shortcomings, about your strengths and weaknesses, about the things you need to work on. Then it moves to your relationships, being able to take the brave step to admit when you're wrong or apologize, or lean into a relationship with someone that is a strained relationship.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not your fault that it's strained, but maybe it's your responsibility to make amends and make it better. Those little things, little steps that you take build this bravery muscle on the inside of you. And then you'll be prepared in the bigger issues in our culture and our society. Take the risk. Step out there. Stop waiting for somebody to discover you and give you opportunity and give you permission to go solve the problem. We waited half our lives. Like, I'm waiting for somebody to tell, and like, no one's going to tell you.
Right.
No one's going to give you permission. No one's going to sanctify you and ordain you to go out there.
Sprinkle you and tell you go forth.
You have to be like, look, if I don't do this, that there's a generation that's going to be lost. If I don't step out there and step out there on the vision that I have, the passion I have, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have shortcomings. I'm not going to have all the resources that I need to do it, but let me take the first step. And once you take the first step out there, it is a risk. There is danger. There's opposition, but you'll have the confidence to take another, and then another and another, and that's how we make progress. But start with you. Making a brave decision in your own life to admit and be honest with yourself, build in your relationships, and then step out there and take some risk, because life is short, and there are people that really depend on you and me, all of us, as particularly as men. There's so many people that need us to leverage our strength for their benefit, and that moral arc doesn't bend by itself. It requires us to be brave enough to step out there and do it.
Society isn't going to heal by itself, and your relationships aren't going to heal themselves, right? Like, we have to participate and part of that is bravery. So man, so this has been really good. Some key takeaways, I think, for being a selfless leader, right, with respect to bravery, is that the big transformational changes require a man to be brave, and that transformational changes. Like that's a key kind of distinction, right?
Yeah, if it's just about you and better yourself, I mean, it doesn't require real bravery, but like when you're really trying to change real things that are going on in our society, in our world, or just within your sphere of influence, is going to require you to be brave.
Yeah, I want this to look different tomorrow than it looks today. Yeah. That's going to require a different response, a different action from me. And then that bravery starts with the small things. First before moving to the big things, and before moving to the things that may even get you a lot of attention. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of King Culture. Thank you guys so much, as always, for joining us for the King Culture podcast. We really enjoy just talking about these issues. And if you're enjoying these issues, we want you to like, subscribe, comment, share, leave us a review so that we know how this is affecting you and how we can also address issues that will help you in your journey to becoming a selfless leader. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.